Welcome to Candid Talks on location. Today I'm at Alouette Lake in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, and it's of course pouring rain. There's so much rain that little streams have turned into rushing rivers, and all of the water is being fed back into Alouette Lake. We've got mist off in the horizon indicating that there's something mysterious on the islands or the land masses on the other side of the lake. Well, thank you for joining me. And although I'm at a lake, for some reason I'm choosing to view all of the water that's running off of the mountain down through the beach. And that's what you're seeing right now, is all of the water that's essentially coming off of the mountain slopes. And it's running through a whole field of rocks that used to be, or builds up to be, mud and clay and rocks. It's a rocky, sandy, muddy clay beach, and what the water's actually done is it's taken away all of the little particles of sand and pushed them back into the lake. And some of the rocks are higher than other ones, more, you could say, grit or traumas, if we if we indicate each one of those little particles of sand that would normally have been around the rock as being a trauma, and it's all being pulled off. So I thought this was kind of interesting, because to me it kind of looked like the water from the mountain was coming down and washing away all of the little bits of soil and sand and grit that was holding the rock in place and exposing the rock so that it could be free from all of that sand. So I thought it was like a nice little metaphor. Anyways, thank you for joining me today. As I said, I'm on location. So this particular area, it isn't or doesn't have Wi-Fi reception, which I think is extraordinary. I love getting out of areas that are over-harassed by electronic fields. One time I drove all the way out to the outskirts of my areas for Wi-Fi coverage, or for cell coverage, just so that I could rest in an area in my car, actually outside of the fields of the Wi-Fi or the cell tower signal. I was able to go far enough and see that I no longer had reception, literally just moving a foot more over in my car, and I was able to get out of reception. I was actually on some sort of road that was corn on both sides that mysteriously went up to some giant house that was far off in the distance that had all of its lights. It's pretty cool. But anyways, yeah, I love getting out of the areas where cell towers and Wi-Fi signals are abundant, because it allows our body to actually restore itself, maybe through not having all that interference surrounding us. It's definitely a beautiful day. What I'm actually going to do, just so we have something other than this to look at, I'm going to move, set it up. All right, there. Now we have something else different to look at while I figure out what it is that I'm talking about. The thing about it is I always have something to say. I always have something to communicate. And, well, let me tell you a story. This is a story that I've been thinking about telling for a little bit. And it's rather a long story. It's the story of my trip across Canada. And last summer, not the one we've just had, but the one before that, so whatever that is, I took my car and I drove with my son across Canada. I left the day before his school started, and I got in the car and I just started driving east. And I didn't really have a plan or an idea of where I was going, other than that I wanted to make it to Toronto by a certain day, because there was a conference from Gregg, Braden and Bruce Lipton near Toronto. And so I had an idea that I wanted to make it for that. However, I didn't really take a grasp at how far it is to drive, and I just set off. So I never really knew where I was going to stop that night. I didn't even worry about booking any sort of hotels or such until I actually arrived in where I was going to look. I went to many towns, and sometimes I would look on my app looking for a hotel or a motel or a campsite, and I wouldn't find one, so I'd just drive to the next one. And I did this an awful lot. And originally I had an idea that I was going to start by driving higher up, like in the anyways, higher up, and then make it to Saskatoon and then down. But anyways, I didn't necessarily have an itinerary, and I didn't have a plan, and I just kept going from one location, and it was as if I was trying to be as spontaneous as possible, never having a plan of where I was staying, never having an idea of anything of a direction except for the fact that I was heading east. And actually I had to stop in Regina for 2 days and have massage because I had really stressed out my back from driving so much. At some times or some days I would drive 8 to 10 hours. And, for people who love driving or drive often, that would probably be no issue for them. But for me, it was as if I was on a mad mission, just to get out and get on the road and never be in the same place and avoid that routine that we get into in life of having to live every day in a row. Like, it kind of stifles us. So this was my opportunity, I guess, to see more, but also just live the unexpected life. And as I've mentioned before, I really do think that that's how we are meant to live, is when we're always in the now. We never truly project on the future, so that the future is only that which comes into our field. And yes, we can definitely be a part of co-creating it. However, it's those opportunities that come to us when we least expect them, although we may have wanted them forever. See, I believe that that's how the universe works, or not the universe, but perhaps the omniverse works, is that things manifest into our reality, not because we drastically want them right now. It's because at that point in time, the cards or the stars can align to give us that experience that we may not even realize or recognize that we want any longer, or that perhaps we once wanted and it didn't work out at that time, but now it does. And it's important when we do spend that time being in the now to be aware and present enough so that we can see that amazing opportunity unfold in front of us, behind us, around us. And so back to my trip across Canada. So I went to many different places. One of the most amazing places that I went to was a town called Moose Jaw. It's in Saskatchewan. It seems to have somewhat of a history that I thought was amazingly interesting. It has tunnels underneath the entire city, which appear to be perhaps geothermally. I don't know why I paused in that word. The tunnels underneath the town seem to be a source of heat for the town. See, this particular town is in the middle of the prairies, and I imagine when winter comes, winter's cold. But all of these tunnels are built all throughout underneath the businesses and the churches, underneath the main roads, rather large hotel, perhaps even an estate that once was on the property. It almost looks like a royal estate that they now have claimed to be a public library and a public park. But if you look at it, it's a 4x4 block by 4 block massive park that has a 1920s swimming pool on it and a manicured gardens and its own stream. And the house, like I said, it looks like a royal manor that they claim to have been built by the town after Andrew Carnegie refused to fund the building of a library there. And the front of the building, you know, it's very modern, but you remove the front of the building with your imagination and it definitely looks like something more than it was. Actually, an interesting fact about this particular town is that in 1978, this town was visited by Queen Elizabeth II and her partner, the king, I guess, or whatever. But yeah, that's a really interesting piece of history. Now, they do claim that Al Capone was present in that town, coming up from Chicago to do all his bootlegging. They actually have a whole tourist thing around the tunnels. However, I found the Royal Manor possibility a lot more enticing, we can say. So yeah, back to my trip across Canada, I learned lots of things. I learned how to be in the moment more often and how to release expectation. One of the interesting experiences that I had is that I ended up traveling unknowingly because I didn't have a plan. I was literally just choosing, but I had driven through 3 or 4 towns and didn't find a place to stay. And it was getting a little bit later than usual. And unknowingly to me, I found an amazing deal on a resort that was in the next town. And when I arrived, this particular resort, it was actually an old residential school that they had converted. And when I mean they, I mean that the families and the community of the residential school, after the residential school moved on, converted it into a hotel and casino. You know, casino makes sense because it allows the community to fund themselves, and they definitely were doing a great job. There was a lot of other buildings being built for the community. And back to the actual residential school, it was spectacularly renovated. Although there were several different mysteries and unexplored ideas that I had while I was walking through the halls, but the actual building just was a testament to the endurance that people had to undergo in order to come out through the other side. And I think it's a beautiful response to take something and to reframe it into something more beneficial. But not only that, to give the experience or the opportunity of the experience for people to actually acknowledge it. And there was this gate outside, which was the original gate that would have driven up into the residential school. And they actually had a sign there of asking people not to leave donations or momentums and stuff like that anymore. I guess at one time there was a considerable amount of stuff dropped off, and the school just decided, or not the school, but the hotel decided that they didn't want to have that there. And yeah, it's interesting. And I never intended, like I said, or even knew about that, but I was guided to come there by the way that I was driving. I would sometimes stop in the middle of nowhere just to fill up on gas, and I would be my normal jovial self and be happy and smile at the gas attendant who was possibly in a place where he hadn't seen people in an hour or two. And oh yeah, that was another amazing story. See, I love rain, and right now it's pouring out rain. I mean, there's so much rain that there's new rivers coming off the mountain. And I don't say new as in brand new. I mean that they normally don't have water on top of it, possibly seeping out from underneath. But there is so much rain that, yeah, that's happening. But back to what I was saying is, on my trip, I actually drove through a monsoon of rain. Means it was raining so hard that morning that I couldn't even see. It was almost as if people were dropping buckets of water on my windshield, and I was unable to see, and yet I'm still driving down the number 1 highway, and it's just amazing. I love rain. I love how it cleanses. I love how it purifies and it takes away and it makes things wet. And yeah, again, this morning I hear people criticizing the rain, but little do they know that this rain is more than just the normal rain that we've had. This rain is living water, in my opinion. We are recirculating waters that are making nature or assisting nature in revitalizing itself to the highest degree. And I think that that's simply amazing. So when I see floods wherever they are, whether it's Chilliwack or Dubai or Washington, I understand the trauma or the chaos that's coming about. However, I also see that nature intended certain areas to be certain ways. There's this thing called the Primordial directive, and that's the balance that was meant to be maintained, that there was a certain amount of trees and a certain amount of flowers and plants and a certain amount of trees beside a certain amount of water. And there was a balance that was meant to be kept. And yet the way that our society was structured was to disregard nature with the exception of how it affected our buildings and our structures and our towns and our cities. So they would build things on the outside of, like, say, for instance, a river, or in some cases, they would actually just move rivers in order to settle places. Like what we're looking at right now, this particular lake called Alouette Lake, a few years back, the water was so far receded that I was able to walk out maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 meters, maybe about 100 meters, or 50 meters. But anyways, I was able to walk out a considerable amount, and I was able to see all these root systems of the trees that were once this lake. Means that this lake is a man-made lake, and perhaps not all of it. I don't know the history of it, but there's a whole entire root system of trees that were cut down, yet their roots that were in the ground are all intermingled or intertangled. And yeah, there's a lot of situations where we've taken nature and we've displaced nature. And that's probably, there's no better local case for me than Chilliwack. Recently, we had some terrible rainstorms, and terrible is the wrong word, but I guess heavy. Yeah, there's a proper word. Recently we had some heavy rainstorms, and they actually flooded the number one highway, which is a highway that goes across Canada in the Chilliwack area. And the actual highway itself was covered in water. See, that particular area is all farmland. It's all very low land, and although they've used their methodologies to block and move water the way they wanted to, when water comes down like it is today, the water goes where the water was meant to be. It isn't interested in, obviously, going where humans tell it to go. So we had floods in gas stations, in farms, and cow farms, and like the trucks were blocked from going. Like, it was, in a sense, a major catastrophe to some people. And yet to the water, they're like, oh yeah, dude, we're going home. We're going where we ought to be. See, we shouldn't have our farms, in my opinion, in the middle of what once was possibly a river or a lake, or just where the water wanted to go. And my sense of it is, if that's where the water's wanting to go, then waiting for the water to go away and then building up the sandbags and the dikes and all that other stuff doesn't really make sense. If we lived in a world of common sense, I believe anyways, that we would move all of those properties and we would let the water want to be where the water wants to be, where God wants the water to be. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. So many amazing things. I think that as nature resets itself and we all have more time to experience it, perhaps we're going to start truly experiencing God's grace with it when it comes to natures. Because I love rain so much that when I was 21 and living in Japan, I went outside at 1 o'clock in the morning just because there was a typhoon and I wanted to experience that rain. And it was amazing. It was amazing being able to lean back in the wind. And the wind was so strong that it almost felt like it was holding me up. And yeah, that was just spectacular. So how are you doing? How are you doing with watching this water? Actually, this is something I did want to talk about. If you ever want to have an opportunity to see energy, you're looking at it right now. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the waves that are coming in the water, that is energy. That's energy moving, the rippling of the water. See, the way I look at it is the raindrop falls from the sky, it hits the water. Now, as it fell, it turned its potential energy into kinetic energy, and then it hit the water, and then that kinetic energy continues to flow. So a visual representation of energy is actually all of these little ripples and waves that are coming in off the water. It's beautiful when we think about everything that we don't necessarily have time to see. See, when I was driving up here to this lake, I had to pass through a newly formed residential area that sits on the outskirts of this lake. They've built massive amounts of houses and condos and townhouses. Actually, I don't think condos as much, but nonetheless, they've essentially taken over an entire mountainside of Maple Ridge, and they've turned it into these really expensive houses. So of course, I drive by and I'm driving here and there's 3 white Teslas in a row, and everyone's driving down a single road that comes up from this expanse of homes, and they're all going to the city to go to work. I really wanted to take a video of it because it was quite exceptional to see all those headlights. And I mean, going off into the distance down the road, there was hundreds of cars that I had to drive by, and they were all escaping their beautiful homes on the side of a mountain so they could drive to Vancouver or drive to Burnaby or drive to Surrey or wherever they were driving to work anyways. And yet I was going the opposite way, the only one almost, to come to a lake where it's raining. Yeah, it's really important to take that time to slow down. There's so much energy being added to our system right now, and that people feel that they have to do more, keep doing. See, that's my understanding of why they put Christmas on the month they did, is so that we would wear ourselves out doing all the things that we were expected to do for the sake of a holiday. All those women that, or mothers or whoever did the cooking of the turkey, spending their energies making this big dinner. And of course, it is about bringing family together, but at the same time, a lot of people would go into severe debt to make sure they bought the perfect gift, to make sure they were appreciated for buying the gift. And, anyways, my whole point being is that it's important for us to take the time to slow down, to eat, and to appreciate all of the small things that are in front of us. Like this whole time that you've been watching, perhaps you have been looking at the screen, and I imagine I'll use this as a do nothing video too. Or actually, I had a lot of other videos that I've done that could be the do nothing, but you've had an opportunity to look at the screen perhaps in a with a focus of something you wouldn't normally do. You wouldn't normally just sit here and look at the screen. And that's why I love doing my do nothing videos. I've done quite a few of them recently because they offer different perspectives of us to focus our attention on if we have to, or perhaps just be a road or a guide marker just to do nothing. Doing nothing, I think, is so valid and important, like maintaining your presence and mindfulness, and just releasing that little chatterbox that goes off in our head that tells us that, or analyzes or thinks about or focuses or critiques. If you don't have that voice in your head, awesome job. Like that's one of the pivotal points, I believe, in healing, is ridding ourselves of that chatterbox. I talked about it in a film or a video that I did, and where I was sitting in the forest and I read this book called The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer, and you can definitely look there. I should have it pinned somewhere. And we spend a lot of time thinking all these voices are our voices, that they're things that we think about, when most of the time what it is someone chattering in your ear. And when I mean someone, I mean an entity. I mean a fairy, a demon, like something of low vibrational nature. And maybe fairy was the wrong word, but something anyways, sitting on your shoulder, just whispering nonsense into your ear. I've often talked about it, how I would often, towards the end of last year, be able to discern that these voices weren't mine. And often just to tell them, go away. I don't need you. I don't consent. Or saying something. And then I would repeat the word cancel. And I would replace it with something I actually do or am proud to have said. And so, this is just another opportunity for me to stand here in the pouring rain, doing nothing with you, except of course talking. Actually, I did one of my most fun and spontaneous do nothing videos recently. It's just me standing a few meters from my home in a back alley underneath a lamp doing nothing. And I thought that was so much fun. It's just, I could truly imagine, and I would love to live a life of simply just doing exactly what I'm doing right now. Just experiencing life and getting back to that road trip across Canada, going places and seeing and sharing. Like in that school, the residential school, I took photographs. I guess at that time I wasn't necessarily ready to do more other than photographs, but I did take some amazing photographs. And when I went to Moose Jaw, I took a lot more photographs. However, I haven't yet been able to create my journeys video that I wanted to do about Moose Jaw. However, there's lots of other places. For instance, Niagara Falls. My son and I, we took the boat trip underneath the falls, and I created a video of that. And it actually shows in the video the energy that was sparking as we got underneath the falls. Like you could actually see the energy, almost like lightning in a sense, that the camera was picking up. And things like that are just spectacular, and sharing those experiences, but perhaps not just sharing them on video, but sharing them in person in groups and such. One of my things that I imagine possibly doing is bringing people like us together at conferences that we don't necessarily have to even pay for. Finding ways through God's grace for funding and bringing people like us together just to simply have experiences which are unique. I understand that any of the videos that I do, they aren't necessarily meant for the masses. Not everyone can understand what I'm filming and why I'm filming, and everyone has a different perspective of things. So I understand that now, definitely. However, I think as we all grow and we all free ourselves from our own individual matrices, just like what was happening on the soil to begin with. Some rocks were standing taller than others, and some were still immersed within the sand lower. It all just depends on the placement and the path that that particular rock is on for how much sand has been washed away. And for some of them, there's just a solid rock sitting on the top that perhaps last night was immersed in mud. And now it's free to be kicked or free to go where it wants to go. And yet there's a lot of other rocks that are still in the lower sand. And that's kind of like how we all are. That's kind of like how we all are right now, is that we're all on our different journeys. Some people are still on their drive to work, keeping their head down and hiding from that boss that's a meanie, and making sure they're going to be on time, and if they're getting close to being late, that they're panicking and freaking out. And then there's other peoples like me that forget about that system. That's not the way that we are supposed to live. I'm not saying that we're all supposed to be out here right now standing in the middle of a rocky beach with mist and water and rain and all that lovely stuff. However, I do think that if an awful lot more of us are going to, or would be willing to do the things that we love all the time, I feel that we're now in a space or an age or an era perhaps where we are going to be able to live our lives the way that we choose them. But we choose the way that we are, or we essentially choose our lives when we are sovereign, when we are not regarded or not having, when we're not made to live life the way that the Matrix told us to live it, the way that the people who organize the Matrix. See, the thing about it is, even if or when the Matrix falls, there'll still be a group of people who basically benefited through all of the hard work and the, I don't know what word to call it, we'll just go with hard work, but the people who owned all the franchises, for example, benefiting off the hard work of other people and profiting off of it. And there'll be the factory owners, and there'll be all of the people that basically got paid because of other people's hard work. Shareholders, for example, owning stocks and shares and all that lovely stuff, and benefiting off of the hard, grueling work that factory workers had to work. I believe that we're moving into a place where everyone is going to receive what they need, most importantly, but also, more importantly, what they're worth. One of the things that I liked doing when I was traveling across Canada was tipping almost everyone that I could tip. And it's because I wanted people to actually receive what they were worth, not what they thought they were worth. And this to me was important because it's important for us to strengthen our self-confidence, to know that we are worth whatever it is that we dream. And when we feel that we're worth what we dream, then it moves our dream into a possibility, essentially. Because if we don't believe that we're worth something, and if we don't believe that we can do something, then it limits creation's ability to help us on that path. So, yeah, I have lots and lots of thoughts. I'm gonna let you go now. Look around and perhaps I'll find something else beautiful to look at. This video right now is already 32 minutes, I think it says. It's raining out, so I'm not exactly sure. And yeah, thank you so much for joining your time with me. And as I often say, please drop a comment, share something. It truly does inspire and elate me. And not that you need to do that. I think God's doing enough inspiring with me. But add your voice to the conversation. Add your thoughts. Reflect. What was the one thing that I talked about on this audio? If you made it this far, what was the one thing that I said, and what cognition, what light bulb came up? And if it doesn't come up right now, perhaps meditate for a bit, put on one of my do nothing videos, or put on your favorite meditation track from someone else, and consider or reflect upon as you begin your meditation, and then let me know what happens. I know that everyone has their own level of what they're willing to, or their own level of privacy, I guess you can say it, and level of comfortability about what they're willing to share. But however, I think that vulnerability and the willingness to share has large amounts of healing potential in it. And I'm not meaning about telling the story about how so-and-so did this to me and blah, blah, blah. I'm meaning to share those cognitions and those experiences and how they've added to your life. And when we share them, you know, we're all like a whole bunch of Care Bears. Caring is still sharing, or sharing is still caring. Anyways, love you so much. Thank you for joining me with this beautiful, beautiful day. Rain, just, I love it. I love the rain. Have a great day. Thank you.